Okay, today is June 10th, 2021. This is the City of Gig Harbor Design Review Board, a virtual meeting. We will start with roll call. I'll begin. Brett Marlowe DeSantis.
Darren Filand.
Marlene Drucker. Marlene Drucker.
Kim Mahoney, staff.
Michelle Thomas, staff.
That's
Okay,
good,
thank
right,
you.
Brett?
Yep,
all we
that's
need.
good. That's all I see too. So that's good. Do we have minutes of May 27th to approve?
Correct.
We do.
Okay. Darren and Marlene, did you have a chance to read through those?
I'm doing my last scan right now.
I see Marlene's page. She doesn't look like it either. Can we hold the approval of minutes till the next meeting since, okay, let's just pass on
Yeah.
that for today. Okay, let's
fair
move
enough.
to, fair enough. Okay, let's go ahead and let's see. Oh, this is an open public meeting. So we do have appearance of fairness issues. Is there anyone on the board that would need any reason to recuse themselves from this project?
No,
Okay. Is there anyone either in the audience or on the team, the project team, that sees any reason for a DRB member not to weigh in on this project? Okay, well then we're good to go. I would say let's turn it over to Kim for the staff report.
Great, thanks, Chair. Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight for the DRB's consideration and recommendation of the proposed alternative design at the Burnham Drive Apartments future site. The proposed development is located on Burnham Drive on a vacant, considerably vegetated 4.24 acre parcel in the B2 General Business District in the mixed use overlay. The site is located just north of the Fraternal Order of the Eagles and just south of the Gig Harbor RV Resort. A Type 4 stream enters the site in the northeastern portion of the lot and traverses south through the lot, exiting in the southeastern portion of the site. A ravine borders either side of the stream. The applicant has applied an appropriate 25-foot critical area buffer and a 15-foot building setback to these features. Therefore, the easterly portion of the site is proposed to be left largely undeveloped. The proposal was previously discussed at the May 13th, 2021 DRB meeting. Noting a need for additional information before a motion could be made recommending approval of the alternative design, the DRB continued the meeting to June 10th, 2021 and asked the applicant to come prepared to address the board's questions and requests for additional information. In support of tonight's meeting, I've prepared a supplemental staff report dated June 3, 2021. The supplemental staff report details the applicant's requested design manual deviations and describes the proposed alternative designs. The report also outlines the specific feedback provided by the DRB specific to each of the applicant's requests and addresses the applicant's response to this feedback. The applicant is proposing alternatives to Gig Harbor Municipal Code 1799-240C and 370A as it relates to grading quantities and retaining wall heights. Gig Harbor Municipal Code 1799-260D related to the width of landscaping adjacent to a primary walkway, and 1799-470C, wherein the applicant requests the DRB's concurrence on their successful screening of the parking garage located below Building A, the northwesternmost building on the site. At its May 13th meeting, the DRB requested the applicant to prepare site sections which compare the existing grade against the proposed grade and show how the buildings will be positioned on the proposed grade to better inform the board on the applicant's maintaining the natural topography and achieving a balanced site. The DRB also requested the applicant to prepare an analysis of their alternatives considerations specific to the design of the accessible walkway. The chosen accessible path design incorporates the need for a number of walls in excess of 6 feet. Therefore, for the DRB to consider the equivalence or superiority of the design, the board requested an understanding of other options which were considered but abandoned in favor of a more superior result. As it relates to the landscaping along the primary walkway and the applicant's proposal to incorporate additional benches where the landscaping strips are slightly narrower than 5 feet, the DRB did not request additional information but did not make a motion approving the alternative design. The applicant's alternative design has not been amended and will need to be addressed at tonight's meeting. Finally, regarding the screening of the parking garage, the DRB requested a modeled rendering or a true elevation of the parking garage to better represent how successfully the applicant has screened the garage. Revised materials intending to address the DRB's requests have been included as exhibits E through H included in the record for this public meeting. Staff maintains its recommended findings outlined in the May 6th staff report, noting a provisional recommended finding related to the applicant's request for grading changes of up to 20% throughout the project's continued design and a need for additional conversation regarding the proposed alternative to incorporate benches in place of a 5-foot landscape strip adjacent to all sections of the primary walkway. Specific to the recommended findings for the site's retaining walls, staff will amend its recommendation to simply refer to the design of walls depicted on Exhibit F, the plan set received by staff on June 1st, 2021, for clarity of the wall design which the DRB has considered. This concludes my introduction to tonight's agenda item. I'm happy to address any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions of Kim before we hand it over to the applicant?
And for me, bro.
I think we're good to go. Jeremy, are you up?
It looks like Steven's back on. Is your audio working, Steven?
It is, yes. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, we can. Go ahead and do your introductions and you're good to go.
Thank you. A little frazzled here. My audio wasn't working and then everything froze up again. I think I had the same problem last time. Didn't completely shut down this time. So yes, let me see if I can share my screen here. Still trying to I had to shut my machine down. And there it is. So we've put together some more kind of detailed exhibits for review tonight, giving a higher level of detail across the property for cross sections to try and take a look at the grading elements and then be able to kind of see a little more in detail and talk about some of the options that we investigated during kind of preliminary review on that accessible path into the site and things we considered to try and make that work and make it as kind of accommodating as possible to try to access kind of get into the middle of a site with such with that's as sloped as it is always going to be challenging to kind of tick all the boxes to make it work right and be as accessible and accommodating as possible. So I guess in that we can kind of just go through some of the cross sections here in detail. If there's, I guess, kind of some specific areas that the board, maybe wanted to see in relations to things. I don't know that there's a specific presentation more than just kind of additional information to try to help answer some of the questions that came up in the previous meeting. If there's kind of specific areas that we wanted to look at on how things sat and how we kind of balance showing some of the finished grades and existing grades on the site. This sheet is just kind of the general overview of the property, showing the existing grades. But we'll kind of go down into look kind of more closely at, this is building E, which is up front. Kind of see how it sits, and you can see that walkway down here, where the accessible walkway kind of comes up along the side of the building, and how the building is associated with the finished grade. We tried to keep our scales here so that the horizontal and vertical scales were kind of showing more of a realistic presentation rather than oftentimes you'll see that horizontal scale and vertical scale are different. So you see some exaggeration. But with how the building here sits up front, moving over into kind of a view that runs along that entire southern property line, showing how the site kind of steps down here with the extended foundations. And I'm not seeing, I guess the walkway doesn't really come up on this, Jeremy, and this view with taking it kind of through the building side there. So we can't really see how the walkway works there along that side, but we can see how the general grading with the existing grade here in the dashed line, and then our finished grades with the site kind of stepping up the slope to kind of prevent the mass grade. In this area here, as we kind of mentioned before, this is where the storm facility, part of the storm facility will go under this parking lot. So that's some of that fill and grade is associated with how that underground storm system will work in there. And the buildings we're kind of showing just as a general, a general shape and height, just for reference. We're not showing the architect's kind of exact building, but just the general height of the buildings in this view. This view, okay, this view is what shows the walkway. So we've got a cross section coming right up the center of that walkway. So showing how that kind of interfaces with the existing grades and where those lifts will be. And we did, I know one of the kind of questions last time was, what capacity will those lifts serve? And they will serve multiple people. They will be, rated so that, multiple people can go down the lift at the same time. I think it's up to 3, probably depending on weight capacities, but it'll be a minimum of 2. So there will be people when needed to provide assistance or just to accompany. This is the building with the garage. You can see how it it's cutting in because of the garage into the slopes. So with the walkway and so that will be one of the bigger cuts on site, and kind of what's increasing that that volume above the 10% will be partly associated with this and with the storm features. And then some more, this area is getting much more into a space where we're closer to our existing grades. And again, all of our scales are equal, so there's no exaggeration. That is along the northern property line. The RV park is up here. And showing some of those grade changes.
Stephen, this is Darren, and I ask a question relative to all your cross sections in totality. Most of the sections appear, other than those 2 kind of cuts on the latter sections, like mostly like section F. It seems like a lot of the buildings are sitting, and a lot of finished grade is sitting kind of up above grade, with the exception of the northern portion of the site. What is, when we are looking at a 20% sort of variant between existing and proposed conditions, are you bringing material on or exporting material off?
I'll defer to Jeremy on that. Do we have a sheet that has those cuts on it, right, Jeremy?
I'm
Correct.
going to interrupt really quick just to let you know that I do want to open it up for public comment before the DRB opens up to full discussion on it, okay? But why don't you go ahead and answer this one?
Correct. So the exhibit right here that Stephen has up is the kind of the cut and fill colored exhibit that shows the different quantities and elevations at different, and I think you can't see what
It's the net cut is 1900 cubic yards.
right.
So, okay, so, well, I guess where I'm going with this is maybe just a general question, not only for staff, but also for my colleagues on the DRB. The intent of balancing the site, in my mind, as it relates to the design manual, is that we are looking at designs that work with the natural topography. But in this case, where you're actually cutting a lot of material out for a lot of subsurface storm drainage infrastructure, really that, in one sense, is kind of below the line. So it's not anything that ultimately is seen, but it does have a factor in the cut and fill. And I want to make sure that, you know, my colleagues as well as staff understand this. And I think this starts to muddy the discussion a bit. And I want to make sure that we ultimately, when we're looking at the buildings, you know, when I look at the cross sections, it looks like some of the buildings and other things are sort of hovering above the finished grade to a degree. Specifically building E, when you're coming up the site, we're going to have a tremendous retaining wall there. And I don't want to get confused with the actual quantities or numbers in cut and fill with the ultimate goal, and that is buildings and improvements are really trying to work with in essence, what was the existing topography to a degree, you know, keeping in that 6-foot retaining wall heights and such, as opposed to looking at the end number. Because again, we're providing all this storm drainage infrastructure that's below grade, and there has to be exports in regards to making room for that, but it doesn't really factor into the why we have this provision in the design manual. Did that make sense with that, Brett and Marlene?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at these cross sections so far as they're presented, I don't really have too many issues with the exception of building E. I will look at the cross section the other way, you know, not so much this one, but it does. If you look at the existing grade and you see where the building's sort of footprint is, you know, obviously it's hovering quite a bit above, but it's more apparent when you're looking at cross section, I guess cross section B, that one. So, you know, I'm imagining coming up Burnham, you know, and looking up at building E, you know, the ascension of the grade, and then, you know, we've got like a story and a half or more of foundation wall that's up there too. It kind of has an appearance of being way out of grade. And so that's just my only comment so far in looking at these cross sections.
Right, and that the extended foundation on that one side, Darren, that fronts Burnham. I mean, obviously it'll have the siding will be extended down to that grade, so it'll look as if it was part of the building.
Mm-hmm. And I presume you have some elevations of that face of building E that we can take a look at.
There were some architectural elevations of that building that were in the initial package submittal. I'm not sure if they were in this revision or not. Stephen can bring those up. Okay, so they weren't deep, yeah. So this elevation didn't necessarily show that foundation dropping on that
Yeah.
side.
So that's, I'm just saying from a scale standpoint, is a problem for me because that building is massive on that face. And I think I'm more leaning towards this idea of the number balancing out. I'd almost say that the number that is needed, and my colleagues can check me on this, but the number that's needed to excavate for the subsurface storm systems and infrastructure, in my mind, should be discounted, meaning like that's not relevant when it comes to the looking at sort of trying to fit the architecture and the development within the existing grade. Like if you needed X amount of 1,000 cubic yards to deal with that system, that really should be set aside in reserve and not really counted against us or the project when we think about how we're trying to balance the site. That's the way I would look at it. Meaning like if the buildings needed to sit lower in the site on this end, and again, I don't know if, obviously if that works or doesn't work, but it seems like it would be a better solution specifically for building E. And, I would think, with your accessibility trying to get down to Burnham, that the building sitting lower would be helpful. But it seems like on the north side of the site, you're already kind of cutting down into it, substantially as it is.
Okay.
Did we need to switch to a public comment or do we want to continue on?
Stephen, are you done with your presentation? Are you good?
There's additional sheets that we can talk about, but it's primarily just looking at the looking at the earthwork, and then we have some of the renderings from the architect looking at the entrance into the garage.
Why don't you go ahead and pull up the rendering and talk about that, and then we can switch to public comment.
Well, it didn't get attached here. Let's go back. I think I can actually, this is the one that was submitted. They did give us, the architects gave us one kind of at the, really umpteenth hour that captures some more of the vegetation that'll be in place at the end, and looking at this area, which is obviously kind of, pretty heavily treed, adding some trees in there and getting a little bit of a better look. I can pull that up while we're talking about this so we can
You
kind
just
of see.
refresh my brain on that building that you're hovering over. What building number is that, or letter?
That is
A.
building A. So that is the building, this building right here. So kind of that view is kind of probably from standing over here in the crosswalk parking lot, kind of looking in towards the garage door.
Thank you.
So we can kind of see the, how that garage door opening is interfacing with this wall over here. That's about 12 feet tall. And I can try and pull up the.
If you can pull up that last one that was sent in after the information was submitted, it shows a little bit better representation.
We're trying to add in some more of the vegetation from the landscape plans to kind of see that, how the view could look from entering into the site. And they have a second kind of more close-up shot here showing some possible option alternative to screen that wall with some trellising that would match in style to the trellising on the side of the building, several of the buildings, to screen that wall from view as you're coming in.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. Think now would be a good time to open up to public comment.
If you'd like to make public comment and you're on the phone, press *9 and it will raise your hand. I am not seeing any public comments.
Okay. Okay, well then we're going to go ahead and close public comment. And we'll move on to open up discussion to the board.
All right, just looking at this image, this is Darren. So looking at the image, it's on the screen now. So what is that, that guardrail assembly right there that's running across the top? Is that a pathway that's up there? And where, if it is, where does it lead to? Or is it individual balconies? What is that up there on that end of the building?
You muted, Stephen.
It would just be a balcony, not individual to the units. Those would open on the other faces. So just connecting to the to kind of the front to the rear. I wouldn't say it goes anywhere. It would just be I think that might be their also I think the original detail, I think that was more open straight down. So that would be kind of a solution to also to kind of minimize the height of this wall from view from the units, would be kind of put this balcony ledge over the building.
Well, I think if you're gonna do something like that, obviously, be somewhat truthful and have some purpose to it. If the residents can use it, or they're walking around to that what would be the west side, building A, that, and I don't know if the topography lends itself to do that, but it just, again, I wouldn't look at it as sort of a gimmick piece. I would use it in some sense to be, I don't know, either two individual balconies that people can actually use and step out on there, or it has some purpose to it. But I mean, I see the intent, but just be genuine with what you're proposing.
Is there any other discussion, or do we want to kind of organize the talk based on the two site design items and the architectural item? I've got topo, primary walkways, and parking garage. Do you want to start with topo? We already kind of started with it. Do you want to finish it?
Yeah, I think so. I guess just to reiterate on my comments relative to the numbers, I'm not really concerned about this percentage, 20%, 14%, give leeway. I think ultimately it's about the buildings and the access nestling down to closer to the existing grade. And I think this idea of the storm, I'd be really curious to see like how much displacement is the storm systems underneath these parking areas causing an export that is, a factor, because it really seems like the buildings are, specifically the building is artificially up out of the grade unnecessarily. It just seems like it appears to be. I wouldn't necessarily say that's maybe true with buildings A and building B. Maybe a little more so with buildings D and C, but again, that's just my initial take on looking at what's being presented.
Well, so just kind of to add on to that, Darren. So the reason E is kind of set where it is just to, as the drive from Burnham comes up at the maximum slope to the parking area, if we were to, that's kind of set that roughly that grade. So, I mean, we could lower that building a few feet and have a kind of a step down, I guess, split level sort of thing. But that doesn't necessarily, help with the accessibility either. So
So
I understand what you're saying.
So give me just give me a general overview of it. Like, obviously you guys are trying to find your numbers that are closer to balancing this thing out. And I get that. Are you feeling comfortable on the north end of the site that you push this thing down into the site? I don't think there's a problem with the north end development. It seems like you guys are cutting this thing down into the grade fairly well. I think what's happening is like on the southern end of the site, and specifically moving west, that the thing looks like it's hovering out of the grade. So I don't know if there's a, kind of a happy medium to sort of still revisit. But I guess what I'm serving up, not being a civil engineer, is I'm not really overly concerned about the percentage at this point. I am concerned about building E looking crazy in height right now.
Right. And so, I mean, if we say we lowered building E 2 feet and lowered the drive coming in on Burnham accordingly, and kind of transferred that grading, to the east, it would just end up cutting more on, as you go through the east side of the site. So it ends up generating quite a bit more cut because you end up having to catch that grade. So it is a balancing act, and I don't want to, we've gone through many iterations of grading of the site to try to get it all to balance with all the other constraints. So with wall heights, trees, everything else, and I do see that building E is sitting up in the end there on the east side, but sorry, the west end, but again, we can lower it a little bit and split that, but it doesn't necessarily, it'll help a little bit, but it doesn't really help the accessibility element either. So, yeah,
So
it is a rough balancing.
So you are splitting, obviously, with building D and building E, those parking and access are split already, but it's the cross moving north on the site across the entry drive, right? And going towards building A, right?
I guess, can you repeat that again?
I guess I'm looking at, as you ascend up through the site, would you grab your full site plan? Okay. So building E and the associated parking to it that is east of the building, right? All of that sitting at one grade. And building D and its associated parking that is west, right? That's separate. So those can move at different positions, I presume, vertically. But within reason, right? Your entry drive, as it comes up, I guess, talk to me about, how that's working, and in working with building A. It seems like you've got these three, you've got your entry drive, and then you've got your access to building E's parking, building D's parking, and building A's subterranean parking. If we start adjusting those, do they all need to adjust collectively? Or can we, vary them a little bit and then maybe even look at them, in total by bringing them all down a bit? E is the problem child in my mind. It's like everything else is probably working fairly well, but E is just really awkward. And it's the building that you see, it's the building that, you're going to represent this development coming from Burnham. It's really the only architectural piece that you're going to see.
Right. And again, we're holding the maximum slope of that drive aisle per fire requirements. And that's kind of what's dictating, getting up to the top of that hill as quickly as we can is based on that maximum slope for fire. Mm-hmm. That's what's kind of dictating, that, and where the parking connections come off of that drive aisle is dictating those elevations and from there. So, if we lessen the slope of the drive aisle coming up to lower E, you could, you essentially have to lower D a little bit as well. And then you end up cutting through the remainder of the site a little bit more, or make the other drive aisles a little bit steeper to compensate for that, which then steepens the remaining accessible routes throughout the site. So it all kind of ties together.
Well, I'm not all, for like just arbitrarily taking everything and just, pushing buildings, A through E down, 5, 10 feet, when we've got, massive retainage, that would happen on the north end of the site in order to do it. Just for the sake of building E. But I would say that, building E may need some more mitigation. It's just got an elevation that is just, got another story and a half. It's not being represented right now. And I think, me personally, and I'm not going to speak for my colleagues, but I'd say we really need to see how that building is going to present.
Is there lands? I mean, that's where kind of that buffer is off the main drag, right? So there should be a lot of foliage in front of it, is there not?
Yeah, it all meets the standards for the corridor, buffering. So it'll be heavily in the building itself sits outside of that corridor.
So what's the general height of those trees in front of it? Do you know?
I don't think Kathy's on, no.
No. So I think the
fir trees.
So yeah, I'd have to compare. It looks like
Do you want me to step in a little bit here, Stephen?
yes, please.
Sure, yeah, Chair, to answer
Yes.
your question in as general terms as possible, the planting that's required in that area is a zone transition buffer, and the zone transition buffer is required to meet very strict planting requirements of a dense vegetative buffer. The dense vegetative buffer requires shrubs to be a minimum of a 5-gallon size at planting. It also requires in excess of our normal requirements for evergreen trees of 40%. The dense vegetative buffer requires even more than that and planted in kind of an offset fashion. And so the trees that you'd expect to see there would be, typical Pacific Northwest, evergreen trees reaching a few hundred feet. Grand firs, Sitka spruce, western red cedar.
So those will grow up in front of that, like what Darren's getting at is that's kind of the prominent facade of this project, right? So those will grow up in front of it.
Correct, yes.
But it's newly graded. So when it says, on the landscape plans, I was looking at L1.1, obviously looking at that, it talks about enhanced 40-foot landscape buffer. So I can't recall, is that area being graded enough that there's no existing landscaping being retained and it's all newly planted?
No, we have some significant trees I think they're, so maybe not in front of that building.
Correct. I don't think there's any in front of
I don't
that
think there's
building.
anything. Yeah, I think there's no significant down there, but there would be, some enhancements, in the area for existing vegetation for some of the sight lines if you're coming down, from north on Burnham, but traveling, heading south on Burnham, but traveling north, there wouldn't be much on-site significant vegetation in there. I think that's where the clearing kind of is for that existing structure.
Well, again, as it's being presented so far, I mean, I don't have any issue with, what we're saying in regards to percentages. I think most of the site is doing a good job of keeping the development, the new development close to the existing grade, with the exception of building E. So I think for me to feel comfortable moving forward with approving from a site standpoint relative to how the grading is, I'd say I need to see more about how building E is being rendered, because it is sticking up out of the ground a full, almost like a story and a half.
Hey,
And
Chair.
we
can
haven't
I-
really seen it yet. And in time, yeah, it'll be buffered, but initially, I think we need to look at that. It's gonna look like
Kim.
a pretty tall building.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Stephen, can you navigate to the last page here in this plan set? I just want for Darren's earlier question to be answered. You guys have computed. Oh, sorry, it's not this one. It's your DRB sheets one.
In the DRB sheets.
Yeah. Go to your grading quantities. The information that Darren's asking for an understanding of the storm and the amount of grading necessary for that is included. You guys have run those calcs. So I just wanted you to kind of zoom in on that to address his question and also better inform the other DRB members for their consideration of the grading that's going to take place on the site.
So again, I'm not, tracking exactly right now. And if I misspeak, please correct me, but the cut that would be necessary for the storm infrastructure, your storm retention is underneath the two parking areas, right? If I remember seeing that right.
I think there's 3 total systems, Jeremy. There's one up top and the 2 down in between building E and D.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct, yeah, correct.
And I assume those have a significant cut, to make room for those systems, right?
Right, I mean, we have to, cut down and the excavate down to the bottom of that facility and then backfill it with, the appropriate material and install it.
And are those, those systems, do they show in your cross sections right now?
No,
Okay.
no.
Do they, Jeremy, off the top of your head, if they are actually below the existing grade line or not? And where I'm going with that is, are we talking about numbers that are actual cut from the existing grade? And, as it relates to the percentages, I would say, those, we shouldn't be looking at those numbers in my mind, because they are cut, but in essence, we're putting in a system. We need that system to do some real work, and hence we got to get that material out of there. So, arbitrarily, if we get it to balance, we're probably going to be, pushing some of these buildings up out of the ground, so to speak. And that's kind of what's getting this problem. So, the percentages to me really are, I think we're good in most of the site. I'm feeling confident about it, just with the exception of building E.
Okay. And I know that on that storm system, I don't have the design plan in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that the bottom of that system would be cut into the native, but not necessarily the entire depth of the storm system. So.
Okay.
Hey, Marlene, can I get a pulse on where you are with the topo?
I'm going to agree that there's nothing magical about, the numbers, the balance numbers. And yeah, I would also agree that the cut that's required for the storm retention, we can exclude that, I guess, as it contributes to not, the out of balance of the cut to the fill, because that doesn't, you're not perceiving that, right? What you perceive is all the finish grades. And I do want to ask you something. Between the parking pads of E and D, there's a retaining wall that shows up on section B. How tall is that retaining wall?
I believe it's only 5 or 6 feet, I believe, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what, so we talk a lot about intention, and the intention is, not to just take the buildings you want and plop them on the site and, cut and fill the site to make it fit the buildings. There's definitely some moves that are sort of good site sensitivity. And again, trying to balance it. And I suppose part of that is, reducing the width of the building slightly and breaking them up into different buildings that have different finish heights. And maybe, that is a lot of wall on E, and there, could be a point to say that, yes, if you're going to have that slope entirely, landscaped, it might not really be perceived that much. And I guess the other things would be possibly looking at splitting the build, having different split levels for the buildings, where the site sort of dictates that you're putting things a lot higher, or, possibly reducing the width of it. So, all the things you could do to make your building fit the site rather than forcing site to fit building.
Thank you, Marlene. I say for now, let's move forward if everyone's okay with the next subject of the primary walkway design. Are we okay with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. So do we have any questions of the applicant or?
Well, it seemed like, from what I could see too, there was, an attempt to kind of demonstrate, an accessible ramp configuration, which is somewhat laughable. I feel bad that they even went through that exercise. It looks, I don't know if you have that drawing, but it just looks like, I don't know, if I were in need of using that, I feel like I had spent a trip climbing Everest, to get up to the site. I'd rather use the lift, to be honest with you. So, again, even in the past, I didn't have a problem with the lifts. I know that Linda, although she's not here, I think voiced some concern about, how that felt, from an accessibility standpoint. And I think I amended my comment to say that if the lifts were large enough to be able to accommodate multiple people so that people could ascend or descend, collectively as a smaller group, I think that would be more sensitive. Yeah, there you go. So take us through this thing. I just want to someone spent the time putting this together, so we should give you your day to at least.
Looks like a placemat at a restaurant, the ones the kids draw through.
So.
Yeah. It's not very practical.
Well, and even at the end of it, you still needed a lift, didn't you?
Correct.
It's like,
Two,
so it's
actually.
like-
Two, actually.
So, all right. Well, I don't know. I would buy someone a dinner for their efforts, on that, at least, in kind. But that is just not practical. I mean, by any stretch. So I think what you're doing, is definitely considerate. Again, if you can get the width and make sure that the lifts can accommodate multiple people, again, I don't have any concern with it. I mean, some of these terrains we're talking about are pretty much not accessible at all. So you are giving people an ability to navigate them, which is, commendable. I guess that's just short of it. And last in this is you guys were just talking about, the pathways, maybe adding some benches, other things. I think it was along building A that we were looking at, right? That was the pathway we were talking about mostly. So does it have some landscaping by it? Is it wide enough? How that all connected? Maybe you guys could show us how that looks now.
Yeah, so I don't, there wasn't a lot of, I think a lot of the question that kind of came up, and I feel like the, kind of any detail kind of got tabled as we kind of talked about the potential accessible path and any changes that may happen there. But so I think a lot of what we did was just kind of look, some of the questions were, what the actual dimensions are, what we're talking about, how short we are. So we wanted to kind of provide some more close-up details of that. I think that I can also go back to that architect's rendering. He's kind of showing, you can see a little bit of a rail up at the top, but let's go. Thought we had 2 shots in here, Jeremy. Is this one?
There was, yeah.
This is it. This is also kind of showing the wall. So in this area, we do, there is, this planter strip down here is going to be kind of in this parking well, so it's not really associated with this planning strip. But kind of just showing the dimensions were off coming up through here. And then the area kind of more into the entrance of the building. We're talking, these are patios and kind of open, the covered patio area is open space for the residents. That's also kind of hanging over or peeking into the landscape area. And then the I thought they did add some. Thought they had added some railing up here, but I guess I was mistaken.
Well, I think my comment is the general pathway, I think is fine. I think some of the detailing, obviously with the balcony, breaking up the building on that end, I think that's more specific to, we didn't want to have this like parking structure, well, that we were looking at. So I think there's some of the elements that you're starting to use to break that down, I think are working. And then here, I think that was some of our concern was, is that pathway, do we have some space wide enough for some landscaping along building A? And it seems like that can work fairly well. I don't remember what some of the other comments were from the other board members on that. If we were looking at planters or elements in the building, I just can't recall, but it seems like the general location of the path, I think, is working. And if you're getting enough space to create a legitimate landscape area in there, I think that pathway is nicely enhanced.
Yeah, and I think on the face of this building, Darren, the building E, there's trellising there too. So you're kind of softening the face of the building.
I think what Kim's looking for is the city wants some guidance on whether the compromise of the parking benches areas are, a superior design element to the lack of depth of that border, right, Kim? Is that what you're looking for? So that's really what we're addressing here.
Yeah, the applicant's proposal for how they're achieving an equivalent or a superior design solution to a full 5 feet of landscaping adjacent to the primary walkway in all areas is by providing a couple of additional benches. And so, my hope is that the conversation will lend itself to whether the DRB agrees that the incorporation of additional benches is found also to be equivalent or superior. Considering that the landscaping areas that are shy of 5 feet truly aren't shy by much, but whether the benches can be seen as equivalent or superior alternative to those infrequent instances of a slightly narrower landscaping area is hopefully an understanding that I'll take away from this meeting.
Thank you, Kim. That's really helpful. Marlene, I know you had questions about it last time. What are your thoughts today?
I don't think anyone goes to a building and says like, oh, if there were just 10 more inches of landscaping, everything would be fabulous. I realize the code says 5 feet because it has to say something that can be measured and quantified. I think that last time we determined that instead of 5 feet in certain places, there was 4'2". Is that right? Was that the minimum that we had? 4 foot?
Muted. I think when we came through and measured it here, the minimum from here to the face of the wall is 4 foot, and then as the stair structure kind of comes up through here, it's as narrow as 3 in through this area, and then in front of building, this is building A, and then down in front of building E, it's 4'2". Or I guess
Yeah.
4 foot right in amongst this in this wall area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, it's you've made this so tight. So it's not, I don't know, it's not, I don't think anyone's going to miss that 1 foot that much, but it is sort of a reflection on how tight you've designed this site, that there's nowhere to find 1 extra foot of buffer. I guess we could look at all these places where it's narrowed in those ways, and just look at whether that's really, I mean, what's the 5 feet? I guess the question is, what's the 5 feet intended to achieve? Is it supposed to just give some space between a walkway and a building face? I mean, what are we planning to do with it? And in that way, does it matter? Have you provided enough of a buffer between walkway and building that, being 1 foot short is going to matter that much? I'm hesitant to say that adding site furniture is the same thing, because I'm not sure adding site furniture is what the intent of having the buffer is.
Yeah, I might chime in to Marlene that, in some degree, you could say, well, if we had 5 feet as a prescriptive width and it was just a linear buffer and it was, a primary walkway and that's all we had, would be the baseline minimum. But I would argue maybe in this case, I'd be willing to say that if it is shorter than 5 feet, the benefit is that we have larger areas that are far greater than 5 feet, that are not too far, they're not too infrequent that you pass by, right? You have areas that might have, 15, 20, or 30 feet, right? Like on the west side of building E, right? You have a substantial amount of buffer and landscaping. And then, yeah, it gets a little tight, but then it opens back up and you get more. That to me seems more why we would say this is equivalent solution, because where it does get tight, we make it really wide in certain areas and it's not too far in between.
Okay. I don't like reiterating what other people say. I'll just say that I think the lift accommodating multiple people was a smart move. There's not many places you can put the ADA walkway on this area, so I don't really see it getting much better than what you did with the ADA. I am in agreement with Marlene that I would be hesitant to say the benches are a superior design. I think we probably need to decide just if we're okay with the landscaping as it is. And I don't think we have to add in that the benches make it better, but you can tell me, Kim, if that works for you.
Yeah, Chair, perhaps the motion could even address, specificity as to the point that Darren was just making about there being other areas on the site where landscaping isn't required, but is provided, and that, in that manner, it's equivalent, achieves some sort of equivalent solution.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Okay, so let's touch upon the last topic and then hopefully we'll get some motions. So the last topic is the architecture, the parking garage.
Again, my comments are, I think we're flanking the entrance with landscaping, which is fine. I don't know if as sincere as the renderings attempt is, I don't know how necessarily it represents what's really going to be there. But I get the sense that the designers are trying to do things to help soften it. And I think that ultimately the intent can be met. I just like to make sure we're still being pretty genuine with that experience there, that, you know, as you come up through, you know, that first thing, just like on building A, we're going to be, you know, potentially staring at a massive amount of foundation, that it has, you know, a soft sort of landscape to it. And it looks like it's modulated well. That balcony piece that's on the end of the building, you know, the horizontal sort of walkway that appears there, if that goes to nowhere, I'd say, you know, that's not really doing a good job. You know, gimmicks or tricks, I don't think are really what we're intending to do here. But I would be genuine with it if you're going to do it. And I think it does modulate the building pretty well. It gives it a nice little soft base and tucks that garage underneath of it a bit more and makes it a little more obscure. I think the fact you're flanking the entrance, the driveway entrance to that subgrade parking with two substantial kind of like landscape areas, both east and west of the driveway, I think are nice. And, you know, I think the elements are there. I don't know if I'm really like convinced that the final rendition is, you know, I'm looking at it, but I think you have the strategies in place to get it done.
And I think, Darren, I think we could connect it. I mean, there's not a lot of connectivity, you know, with the way the slope is back there, but, you know, the unit kind of in the rear on the corner could be connected to that walkway, and we can look at, you know, the width of it and, you know, see if we can provide enough width where some seating, you know, like little patio tables and seating can be provided, you know, probably more with the way those windows are. You'd probably want them, you would need to look at positioning them more center, or putting them in an area where you're not sitting right in front of somebody's, you know, a unit's window. But I think there could be some way to try to encourage some use of it from tenants.
Yeah, you actually have an opportunity to do something nice there and usable. That is more than just, I think that having the overhang there kind of detracts from sort of the meanness of going into a concrete bunker. But yeah, it would be nice if you used it for, if it had a purpose, you know, that it could, if it was used in some way and it was activated, that would be better than just having a railing that doesn't do anything, or that just holds geraniums. And yeah, I think the landscaping on the outside, and you know, that's helpful. And I think that was the intent of what they were looking for. I do think the overhang there is actually a good idea, because it'll put all that into shadow and de-emphasize it. So it's a good idea. It just, you know, it would be nice if it was seen as an opportunity to be an exterior place rather than kind of just an add-on thing.
Am I looking at the one that's above the red vehicle there? We're looking at two specific units on the ground level of building A, right? So with that, it almost seems like, you know, maybe it's not a contiguous, you know, pathway that connects from the walk, but maybe they are more balcony elements that you can come out from each of those units at the lower level of A, you know, and sit outside, but they still have privacy, that it's not just a general thoroughfare for anyone to walk by. I think they could still serve the purpose of breaking up the building on the backside, but they could be more personal to those units.
Thank you, Darren and Marlene. I agree. I think the balcony is doing a good job of modulating and screening. It is an added element. I don't see it written in to the it said landscape screen is what we're talking about. So technically we would have to add the balcony. And how would that work, Kim?
I think that I could make that work because so much of the landscaping is, dependent upon that balcony structure being there. That I think that I can make that work.
Okay. And I have been on the DRB long enough to know that we don't like anything gimmicky. So I would say make it real somehow and you'll be good to go. Okay, so that's the last of the three things we were talking about. Is there anything else before I hear a motion for something?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Was there a question on that ADA walkway about retaining walls, or am I not remembering that right?
Yes.
So that ADA walkway required retaining walls that were in excess of 6 feet. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm going to say that I still don't think that's a good way for people who have disabilities to access the site. And yes, your labyrinth drawing of switchback ramps is ridiculous. But you just think about your linear one of go up a ramp, get in a chairlift, go up a ramp, go in another chairlift, go up another ramp, another chairlift, what that sequence is of what you've done there, all on the back side of your site. And I'm just wondering, even on your ridiculous drawing, you have a chairlift that goes up 6 feet. There are elevators. Would there be a way to have just a less ridiculous ramp that goes to an elevator and then connects to that first building there, building E, rather than making people go through sort of a crazy sequence?
It's a good question. Has an elevator been looked at?
Thus far, it's just been using exterior lifts, and the maximum height those can go up to, which is around 14 feet.
Well, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you would still, maybe an elevator would kind of accomplish the 2 lift issue here, but I mean, the amount of elevation that we have to accomplish, and the goal is to get people not to building E, but into the amenities of the site, which is all up here.
So you would still need a lift up building D regardless.
Yeah, because that's the amenities of the site are all located up in this what's relatively flat. This kind of whole route through here is accessible. So we had the challenge here was to get all the units into the rec building, get all the units to the garbage facilities, and then once you're there, it's then how do you get them down to Burnham? How do you make an accessible path down to the road when you're sitting up at the elevation here?
So what I hear you saying, Stephen, is that all the other buildings are pretty much accessible once they're in them to those rec areas and common spaces, with the exception of building E.
It's the exception of so building E. All the units, all the accessible units within the facility are up here at top, and then the accessibility throughout the site is then up here at the top. The issue that we had was then how do you get people from up here to Burnham? Not necessarily building E. It's the units and everything from the top down to accessibility for people that are using Burnham, maybe using the trolley, or just when I know Burnham has they're improving the road. There's city projects, I think, to make improvements. I don't know if it's including some of the
That's really
sidewalks,
helpful. That's super helpful. But is there even a sidewalk out there right now on Burnham?
There
So
will be,
there
a path on Burnham
to there.
that's in the
So
work.
once they get the accessibility down to Burnham, they're going to be able to make it to that trolley.
I don't think there's a trolley stop. I don't know where the closest trolley stop is. We're closing the gap in front of the Eagles. There's a little gap right here that we'll be closing to make that connection. And then, you know, so I think, I can't remember. I think the closest trolley stop is either down in front of the Hayuhihi or up in front of the RV park. Where there isn't sidewalk in front of the RV park.
There is a plan in the works to get sidewalks, a side path all the way down Burnham. So maybe in my lifetime, people won't be walking in the ditch there. So let me just ask you something. When people do that final lift to building D, then they go through building D to get to the pad that's in the middle. Is that how you have that sequenced?
Correct.
Uh-huh. And just for your residential buildings, what's your total number of units?
What is it? 78.
And how many were required to be accessible for people in wheelchairs?
I will have to get into the landscape plans, unless you remember, Jeremy.
I don't recall.
Yeah, there's a ratio. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, and then the different.
Are those scattered amongst all the different buildings, your accessible units? Or?
So I think we can see it here in this plan. So we have this in building B, and then the different types of units as well. We have to have a ratio. So building B, and then I guess they're here, and I thought there was some in C and D, and then the rest of them are in A. I thought they were dispersed.
Oh, I
and
see.
Then,
so
and
these
then
blue
this
lines
is
are actually your accessible path. Is that what I'm looking at? Okay.
Or that's no, because this isn't
No, it
accessible.
isn't. Okay. No, that's just your walkway path. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It goes over there. That's not your accessible.
Yeah, let's see if I can. I don't know what that layer is. This is the architect's plans.
Yeah. You know, and I'd say those chair lifts don't have a great track record. I think for personal residential units, they work really well. In public applications, we've seen that they have a lot of maintenance issues. The two that the city owns are I've never seen them functioning.
I'm trying not to laugh at that.
Well, I mean, it's you know, it's a shame, and it doesn't reach, you know, the American with Disability Act is not my favorite piece of legislation, but I mean, there's an intention to it, which I don't think doing this really meets. I mean, I think it'll meet the letter, but. Oh, there you go. Unit
Okay.
parking matrix, parking.
I'm not seeing their unit count.
Well, I think the information is so far has been really helpful in illuminating that most of the activity that will be accessible is on the same level, with the exception of getting down to Burnham, which eventually will have a sidewalk. So
I would like to see that path done better. And if you're saying that you need to have higher retaining walls to make that path work, I'm gonna say make that path work better. Just me.
Okay, so so far, and this is just me kind of feeling out what was said, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you guys are not ready to make a motion on the first item of natural topography or the item that involves the ADA. I'm not sure if you can make a partial motion based on the landscape portion. Kim, you might be able to speak to that. And then do you want to see the parking garage again? I guess, how much are you asking, are we asking them to come back with, and are we making a motion on anything tonight?
Okay, well, I guess we, I guess for the parking garage, since we're looking at it, I guess we'd like to see that developed, maybe see it in the plan and in the elevation of what that thing that you've added is actually going to be. And we've kind of been in consensus that we want to see it be not just decorative, but useful in some way that makes sense for the rest of the project. And we'll leave that up to the applicant to figure out exactly what that is. I think we all agreed that we like the gesture of it, but that we want to see it developed into a real thing. So I don't know if we're ready to sign off on it and say, you know, sort of just trust in them that it's going to be right when it's done, or say, or make a recommendation that we want to see it again.
Well, chiming in on it, Marlene, I think that we would need to see it, some elements associated maybe with building E, because we haven't really seen the true elevations for that. And since we would be doing that, I don't see any reason why we couldn't just ask to see this again in the development. That way we don't have to, you know, put the onus on staff to try to interpret, you know, what we're thinking. So again, I'm not being hypercritical on the design team here. I think they have elements in place. We, you know, and it's starting to look fine. It just needs to be truthful, you know, in what they're doing. And then I think they'll have a solution.
Okay, board. So it sounds to me like you're asking for another pass at a little bit of all three items. Is that correct?
Maybe the one that we're willing to sign off on is the reduced landscaping at walkways.
Yeah, I don't have any concern with that. I think because we have much larger, you know, than 5 foot, you know, landscaping that's very, you know, frequent and periodic as you walk up the pedestrian path, that, you know, I'm comfortable in that it's reduced in a few locations.
Kim, would you be comfortable if that motion is made, but it is not part of the ADA?
Right, yeah, the ADA is entirely separate, because the ADA is only a part of this conversation because the walls associated with the lifts exceed 6 feet, and that standard is associated with 240C. So if we're just talking about 260D, all we're talking about is a little bit skinnier landscaping strip. I have, you know, I would be very comfortable if a motion, you know, considered just that element of it, whether it wanted to consider the benches a part of that or not, or just the fact that there's, you know, beefier landscaping in other areas where it's otherwise unrequired. However,
Okay, that sounds good.
yeah, we can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, I think Darren, you were on your way with that, unless Marlene wants to officially make the motion. I'd say go for it.
All right, so I want to refer in the staff report. So Kim putting me to the actual reference. Let's see. So am I looking at, let's see, you have an updated one, right?
It's a
The
supplemental
revised-
staff report, but even the original staff report, in particular for this one, didn't include, it's not going to be very helpful for you because I did
Okay.
not include recommended findings or a recommendation for this item. I really wanted to hear some of the DRB's thoughts on the benches as being seen as equivalent.
Yeah, I don't think, I think that at least the three of us, we don't feel like the benches are really adding, you know, they're not necessarily making the design equivalent. I think it's really the increased landscaping widths, you know, that exceed 5 feet that are found throughout the site that are, you know, in sort of in tandem, a nice combination of narrow and wide that provide an equivalent solution. Not so much the benches. They are a nice amenity, but And I think in concert, maybe the benches are strategically placed in areas maybe where there's a little wider landscaping, I think is probably more helpful. You know, if it does get narrow, I would leave it as landscaping.
Was that the motion? Okay, do I have a second? Was that, I didn't hear the actual language of the numbers and everything. GHMC 17.99.260D, primary walkway standards. This was a motion to approve the applicant's landscape plan. And then what was the other part, Aaron?
That it is an equivalent solution due to the fact that there are areas within the landscape plan that exceed 5 feet, and no landscape areas are, I guess, reduced beyond, you know, I don't know if we have things that are smaller than 4 feet, but that in combination, that the wider landscaping areas in tandem with the narrower landscape areas provide an equivalent solution.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Marlene. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Okay. As for the rest of the items, do you want to give them specific direction on what you want to see?
I think we already have.
I think in regards, yeah, I would agree with Marlene in regards to the parking garage, that what we're seeing in the rendering on the screen has the elements. Just, you know, make it real, and that way we can sort of make the final judgment to say, yeah, if you build that, that looks great, we're good with it. Right now, it just looks a little contrived, and I don't think it really has a real purpose. And I think you can give it some real meaning and still get the job done.
So Darren, what I hear you saying is the elevation on the rendering for the garage, you'd like to see one that's a little bit more progressed in design based on the feedback. And then I also heard you say you wanted to see the elevation facing Burnham on building E, was it? So those two elevations specifically, correct?
Yeah, but I think this one, that's just, you know, obviously relates to the natural site conditions. My overall, you know, concern is that I feel like building E is hovering way out of the ground. So it's the one piece where it seems like the building is not nestled into the site like the rest of the design is. So if we were to, you know, say that, hey, it's the balance of everything else sort of blending together, and there's a nice, most of the site is nestled in and working with the existing grade, I would need to see more design information in regards to building E that I feel comfortable. Right now, we haven't seen an elevation that really depicts its true height. You know,
Right,
and
that's
it's
what I was
sitting kind
going
of-
after. What exact plans you want to see from them so they can have, you know, instructions.
Well, I think we need to see the true elevations of building E, and then, you know, it's going to sit perched up there. You know, there's going to be kind of a day one, you know, with some of the new landscaping for the buffer, you know, looking at it from Burnham. And it is I would say it's probably the building that'll represent sort of the face for this development. And yet I just have a feeling it's going to look a little out of scale. I just want to see it. So.
Okay, no
Other-
worries.
Yeah, and I think that relates to, you know, this natural site conditions to say, well, I think it looks a little awkward. We should push it down closer to the existing site grade. You know, and I don't know what that means or the ramifications for that moving forward, but that again, that's my last comment, I think, relative to
Okay.
to site design.
Okay,
No,
thank you, Darren.
can I just say about that building E?
Yes, please.
Maybe when you actually look at that a little bit closer of what it's doing in the landscape, it actually makes sense to do something below where you're doing you know, maybe you want to, you know, maybe you actually have an opportunity for, I don't know, movie theater, a storage building. And maybe if that's, again, another concrete bunker type thing, maybe you look at what's above it and ways to soften it. You look at a wall that is that far out of the ground, maybe there's another level that belongs in at least part of it. So just, I don't know, when you start developing that to show us something, maybe you're going to see some opportunities there to do something rather than just saying like, oh darn, the landscaping doesn't work with what I want to do here. Maybe there's a way to make the building, you know, take advantage of what that landscaping is.
Okay, I think I'd open it up to applicant to see if you have any questions of the DRB since we're asking you to come back again.
Jeremy, do you have anything?
Well, I hear what you're saying, Darren, about the building eaves. We can look at that and provide some additional, you know, elevation from the architect of what that would look like. And, you know, go back through and see what we can do different there. I mean, it is challenging just, you know, given the other constraints of trying to get the site to grade out and meeting all the other, you know, requirements. So,
Well, again, I think, you know, looking at that, where we know that a building is, you know, from an architectural standpoint, I'm empathetic to the civil engineering, you know, sort of constraints. But when the architecture, you know, sort of forced to be, you know, those proportions, then it really needs to champion that. It's got to own it. It's got to, hey, if I'm going to be this tall, the design has to, you know, that the ratios and the proportions and the materiality, it's got to be beautiful. And maybe the site, again, maybe going back to those percentages, if you did some stepping with some walls, I think that's where Marlene was going with some of her comments. I'm not concerned if you start adding more material to the site, you know, and stepping that down a little bit to help reduce the elevation of building E. You know, it'll be ultimately landscaped. Maybe it's, you know, it's a combination of the buffer plus landscape terracing that heads up there. But, you know, right now it sits, you know, significantly above the existing grade. And it's got to really own that in a very, you know, beautiful way. And if it's all architecture, then it's all architecture. So we'd have to see the proportion, the scale, and the materials, and how that's going to work.
okay.
I mean, if you, as just another comment, let's just imagine if you slide over on your section there where your mouse, yeah. So let's look at that section, that building E pad there. Let's imagine, if you will, that the lower floor of that building were a story and a half below where it is, right? And the building was like I guess that would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, 6-story building. Well, we could argue that yes, the building is at grade. Its lower level is sitting down, you know, at grade, and, you know, and hence it'd be a moot point. So if that isn't the case and the main elevation is another story and a half up, well, then the architecture's got to really, you know, sort of, you know, save the day, so to speak, right? You know, the building isn't really changing per se, but it would mean, you know, that we'd be looking at, you know, windows or doors on that lower level. You know, we'd be, you know, the architecture would, you know, have some interest, and it would look like it's nestled at the grade as opposed to being a solid mass wall. So hopefully that maybe gives you kind of some sense of where we're at. Again, the rest of the site, I think you guys have done a great job. It's challenging. I you know, again, I'm empathetic, but this is kind of your front door piece right here. It's got to be the best.
Thank you, Darren. Okay, Kim, is there anything else you'd like us to go over before?
Just a couple of things, yes, Chair. So one thing is that I know my notes could definitely benefit, maybe if Board Member Drucker would be willing to just really drive home what she means when she says that the accessible walkway needs to be made better. I mean, there was a lot of conversation that I heard about kind of the infeasibility of lifts and maintenance required. So is it, I don't want to see lifts at all, or lifts are okay if this, or just maybe a little bit more pointed specificity about that. And then the other thing that I wanted to note was that if we're coming back, again, it's helpful if we acknowledge a specific date as being continued. And I would encourage, I know that Michelle probably already has the calendar up, so we can discuss that in a couple of minutes, but I would encourage the applicant to consider giving a little time. Certainly we're looking in July, but particularly with the comments and the feedback that I just heard from Darren is I imagine there's going to be some architectural changes to that west facade of building E, because the civil engineering of the site is going to be, so demanding and unforgiving that there may be a lot of changes. And what I don't want to see happen from the applicant's perspective is for there to be changes in modulation or, maybe window design, or however it might avail itself, or building materials, siding materials, however it might reveal itself to then push the site out of conformance with other sections of the design manual, such as mass and scale, window ratio, materials allowed. And so I really want to have enough time to be able to go over that with the applicant before we come back here again, so that we don't create a new need to be back here once again after the fact.
Okay, Kim. So what I heard was, I think, two things, right? So you
Yeah,
want Marlene to address,
Yeah.
so you want Marlene to address what her meaning was with
Please.
better for ADA. And then you want a date for continuance that both the DRB are okay with, and of course the applicant, and having enough time to pull it together. Is
Sure.
that what I heard?
Yes, those are very two long-winded things that I would. Yes.
That's okay. I'm paying attention here. I'm working it. Okay, Marlene, you're up.
I can't compel you not to use a chair lift. They're legal things, you can use them. But I'm countering your argument that says I must have a high retaining wall because this is the only way that I can have an accessible path into these buildings, because I don't believe that. And again, you haven't explored the possibility of using an elevator, which, elevators are common things for people who have disabilities. Yeah, I'm not buying that the retaining wall is necessary, because this is the only way to do it. So, because there are lots of ways to do it. And I realize that they might be more expensive and they might require more thought. But I guess I want to see that. I guess I appreciate the ridiculousness of showing a switchback ramp. So we understand that a switchback ramp doesn't work on this site. But there's something better than what you have here, which is just, putting your accessible way of travel at the back side of the site and having people run through buildings. And it's just, it's not a convenient way to do it. And I guess if you didn't need those retaining walls, I would have nothing to say about it. But since you do, this is what I'm saying about it.
So just let me real quick. So even if we were to incorporate a elevator or a higher lift to get, a more direct route from the Burnham sidewalk to Building E to the path that leads on the south side to Building D, that would, no matter what we do, that would still require walls in higher than 6 foot, regardless. So that's not going to, alleviate that,
right,
that requirement.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Marlene, were you going to alleviate that, or you're just trying to get rid of chutes and ladders?
I don't like the chutes and ladders. I don't like the, I in general don't like the, people who can walk have this entrance, but people who are disabled have this other, kind of service entrance. I think that that's something that, so let's say that. We want to avoid making people with disabilities treated as second-class citizens. So I think the other members of the DRB said, well, it was a positive thing that the lift takes more than one person. So at least you're coming in with other people and you're not like, okay, you know, you in the lift, you go there and we'll meet you later. And I guess this is something we discussed at our other meeting, is that those of us who are sensitive to this see that people with disabilities spend their whole lives, you know, dealing with things like that. And I guess, you know, when I say better, is I just would like designers going forward in the future to treat them better. So I guess if that requires 6-foot walls somewhere else, then bring them, let's see them, let's see what they look like. But it would be really nice to actually provide a really nice and pleasant way for people with disabilities or with strollers or just carrying stuff to get to your buildings. I mean, you know, I think about these chair lifts, and again, not your fault, and it's something that, you know, you legally can use, but they do have maintenance issues in public applications. And again, not your fault. You're gonna, you know, design this project and walk away. But, you know, what ends up happening is that if you are a disabled person, you're in a situation where if you can't drive, you're begging somebody to drive you there, or you're just not going to this place at all, which, you know, is not the intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
So I just like to add just something there at the end, designing the project and walking away. We work, you know, literally hundreds of feet. Our offices are hundreds of feet from this property. This is our community. This is our neighborhood. You know, members of our staff live and work here. So that's, I don't know, that seemed a little off mark there, you know, for the conversation that we're having. But the, you know, we understand and we're sympathetic to the challenges that people have in accessing things. Sites like this present, you know, huge challenges to get into. You know, with the slopes and providing any level of accessibility into a site like this is problematic, and I think you understand that. But I think, you know, using a combination of walkways and people walking through buildings, which is, you know, something that's done common, you know, seems like a solution that any development, you know, within Gig Harbor that provides accessibility is using. You know, those accesses are located, you know, at any face, at any frontage along the property. One entrance isn't more important than another. So I don't know. That's just my 2 bits. I mean, I don't think we're, you know, we're not looking at this as a cheapening, as the least expensive route possible to, you know, to solve a problem. We've had, you know, multiple people on our team, you know, scratch their heads on how do we solve this problem. There aren't a lot of, you know, resources or facilities out there to help us accomplish this. I feel like some of your comments were, I don't know, were a little off mark, you know, for what, you know, our level of professionalism here, and seem to be a little, I don't know, not constructive.
Okay, well, I'll apologize for that, but I will say, again, the lifts in the city of Gig Harbor, you know, group of people who we all say this is important to us. No one's come to fix them, you know, or when these break, are you planning to come and fix them? So, you know, okay, so I'll apologize for the insensitivity there.
Marlene, I think what you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're looking for is just the rest of the exploration. So we saw that crazy pathway, which obviously isn't going to work. And you're asking, hey, just look at the elevator and see if that works. And if it doesn't work, then we're in this conversation again. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, let's try that. You know, again, you said your limits of your lift are 14 feet. You know, in a way, I would rather see you have fewer lifts. You know, you think about the sequence of getting somebody into the lift and pushing the button and it goes up. You know, I would rather see you do more disturbance to the grade and have fewer lifts than have more of them. So again, we could see what that looks like. And
I imagine an elevator with like a Batman tunnel coming out of it.
well,
I
you
don't
know,
know
you actually, you know, what I imagine is you could do like an elevator, you know, you could do a tower of elevator, and then it's, you know, with a bridge that comes across, and then it could be sort of something fun rather than something burdensome. And I guess I'd rather, you know, you're worried about cut and fill, but if you actually did something cool, then, you know, maybe we'd say that would be an exception to, you know, trying to rigidly adhere to, you know, what the natural landscape is doing.
Okay, thanks, Marlene. So Cam, to answer your question on better, it was a further exploration of perhaps an elevator is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Are you okay?
I have much better notes now. I think that the applicant, I'm sure that Stephen and Jeremy would agree, they have better notes now on how to be able to better prepare for that next time.
Okay,
Perhaps we could look at an appropriate date for continuation.
that sounds great. So let's start with Michelle, what's available, and then run it by Jeremy and Stephen and see what they think.
Yeah, Michelle, I'm thinking late June or July.
We have July 8th and 22nd.
This is kind of like an auction, guys. You're gonna have to like bid on one of them. This is so that they don't have to re-announce your application. The continuation makes it easier for everyone.
It allows us to circumvent the noticing.
Yeah.
So I think that talking with one of the owners here, we'll do the 22nd.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. Michelle, you have that down?
I do. I'll put that on the board.
Okay.
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, well, I think that ends the business of this project for today. Okay. I guess we'll see you guys on, you said July 22nd?
Yes, Chair.
I'm sorry, can I
Okay.
ask the applicants a question? One more
Yeah.
question. So we
Yeah.
have a continuation. The last time we saw the landscape architect was part of your team, and I think that was helpful. I don't think we have anybody from the architecture group who's attended this meeting, and it seems like a lot of our questions are about architecture. So I was wondering if for the next date, we could have somebody from that team come to represent.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Marlene. Okay, Stephen and Jeremy, if you're good to go, we can, you don't have to listen to the rest of our meeting. And then I'm going to turn this back to Michelle to see if there's any other business for today.
Our next upcoming meeting is Harbor History Museum pre-application meeting. And that's it.
Okay, board members, do you have anything else to discuss, or do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Have a
Hey,
good night.
Chair, do you have an additional 2 minutes?
Yeah, you want me to stay on?
Yeah, I think we should finish our chat earlier about Pioneer Way mixed use, if you don't mind.